Awareness, the final frontier. This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan. I'm with my friend and trusty co-host,
Ryan Tom O'Connor.
And we always like the guests that we have, and sometimes, not very often, we interview two guests at the same time. I'm very excited about today's thing because it's a slightly different angle of how people can enter into higher states of consciousness. I'll be introducing two people who I'm starting to get to know because they moved into my hometown, which I'm very excited about. So let me tell you a little bit about our guests. Dr. Amy Albright has played at the highest levels of executive coaching in major corporations. But underneath this business savvy is a deep understanding of psychological and energetic dynamics. Her training in cognitive psychology and her practice as a doctor of Chinese medicine complements her spiritual gifts that she's had since childhood. And I must say, she is a fascinating person as I've gotten to know her. And I think you'll really benefit from what she has to say. And she does a business that she'll talk about with a person I've heard about for years. His name is Dr. Drew Pierson. He's the mind behind some of the world's most cutting-edge applied neurofeedback training. He's a polymath to his core. He's specialized as a neurotherapist, analyzing and optimizing the brains of peak-performing adults, from Olympic athletes and Navy SEALs to conscious change makers and CEOs. Dr. Drew is a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine who is the planet's foremost neurofeedback expert in applied consciousness. And that's not a brag. He has quite a reputation. So welcome to Awareness Explorers, both of you.
Thank you. It's very exciting to be here.
So where do we start with the backgrounds that you two have? Maybe a good place to start is what you see that you're trying to do in this field of neurofeedback and bringing people to their peak ability.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. I mean, really, it's the question of what is possible. So as a team, Dr. Drew and I, and as individuals, we're always leaning into what is reality, and therefore who are we, and then what is possible. And so, we can think of the term biohacking, by the way, we both have a little bit of a mixed feeling around. It sounds rather mean and not friendly. And but just to use it as the term, if biohacking isn't really about being competitive with new metrics and trying to compete for who's got the better HRV, but it's actually a field that allows for an upliftment of consciousness, right? And the consciousness upliftment does also increase somebody's health and well-being, and then somebody's health and well-being increases also uplifts their consciousness. So this is kind of like a framing then that we do our craft, Dr. Drew being the lead neuroscientist, obviously, but both of us having a really deep understanding of science, both of us being deeply spiritual, and utilizing neurofeedback therapy, which within all of the biohacking, it is kind of that pinnacle, right? The ability to not just do, for instance, biofeedback therapy, but neurofeedback therapy. We're really bringing ourselves into, let's say, the motherboard on a physical and an electrical level, but also just that seat of the soul in the brain. And from there, really anything is possible. We are timeless souls on an endless journey. We know that we are a miracle, just even that we're alive, like as biological beings with our cells doing everything that they are. But we also know that we are an interface to the divine. And so through that, we have an unlimited amount of capacity and an unlimited amount of expression because we're tapped into a source that is, and we are a part of a source that is unlimited, right? So when we combine those sorts of deep understandings, not just thought constructs, but Dr. Drew and I have both lived for many decades on a dedicated path in the quest of understanding consciousness and helping ourselves and others to root into a deeper state of awareness and have more practical, real world, applicable capacity as a result of it, right? So not done in the sake of, just being able to record numbers of hours of meditation or something like that, but really be better parents, leaders, pioneers, and visionaries to be a part of the change that needs to happen. So at the highest level, that's really what we're doing. And we're utilizing, yeah, the most advanced neurofeedback therapy in the world, but also so many other elements that come together and really enhance and also kind of break free from limitation what it is that the individual is capable of.
Mhm. You said that well. Something I find somewhat unique about both of your work is that you have both a scientific aspect to it and a non-scientific or more spiritual thing that a lot of our guests normally have, and very few people combine those two things. I'm wondering if that's been a challenge, or do you find that they work really well together, like chocolate and peanut butter? How's that combination worked?
Yeah. Well, I would say that they're all one and the same thing. And the only problem that has come up with it is that other people didn't get that. So it
Yeah.
was just last week, and I can let Dr. Drew speak more to this, but we haven't known very many people in academia that are doing neurosciences that really understand the way that this actually all works, right? That, when people are having profound spiritual awakening experiences, or maybe others, yeah, any kind of really profound evolutionary experience, that they're not a neurological aberration to be pathologized, right?
Mm.
This is actually one and the same thing. And so basically, another way to say it is that any state of consciousness that can be achieved, or any emotional or felt experience that can be achieved, has a neurological correlate. Okay, so if it exists inside of the brain, then we can recreate it by creating that environment in the brain, right? So we teach the brain how to be a host to, how to be a fertile place for those miraculous and transcendent states. And I think, Dr. Drew, I didn't get to go in person to this conference, but it's really exciting. And Dr. Drew was there in person, meeting with a lot of the folks that are in academia, that they're finally, in our estimation, maybe there's been tons for years, but we just haven't known them. So this is a big shift for us.
No, they haven't been around. You're right about that.
I don't think so. I just wanted to give everybody credit, but if
Yeah,
if they
no.
were there and I just didn't meet them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big push now for this neurospirituality coming out and determining, what parts of the brain or networks and what parts see divinity, what parts see miracles, what parts are really, really ingrained in not only our religious aspects but how they come like in science and really move through our day-to-day experiences, and how do we experience life through that? And is it through fear and reactivity, or is it through this great joy of miracles? And they're really showing that delineation. They did some incredible um, research on what we call lesions in the brain. They were taking out tumors and determined that some people could get back into those states and some people couldn't once they removed those parts of the brain. So they're really honing down directly into those parts that we can actually enhance to enhance our experience in life, and through spirituality and through connection and through community and through synchrony that we all tend to pull apart when we're really self-individualized and feeling lonely, basically, and as an isolate. Um, so that's a big step, I think, in academia for that to really come about.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
agreed. And just to further that one more step, I think the distinction is that typically academia, or the normal way of thinking about science, is to be extractive and reductionistic and keep everything inside of materialism, right? So it's this construct that by default doesn't understand the whole, because it's so interested in analyzing the parts. And so what we're seeing is what we were both sharing, what we saw as a shift as we were participating in this conference, is these, it was put on by a Harvard, Dr. Michael Ferguson, and there were so many Ivy League incredible minds there, and the way that they were able to navigate between the science and the spirituality in the way that we know that we don't know, but how do we also create better languaging from a scientific lens, better studies from a scientific lens, but also not reducing what we're studying or what person experiencing into just what's being studied. So I feel like it's a deep level of humility that brings us into a lot more accuracy from the field of science as a whole. So I think for us, it's a feeling of it's a little bit less lonely. We're finding some tribe inside of it, which has been really amazing.
That's great.
Mhm.
Brian, you're new to this. What shows up for you?
Well, let's say I'm a meditator, and well, of course, people meditate for various reasons. Let's just pick two. Let's say, well, on one side, people meditate so that they can become calmer, they can help reduce anxiety, they can function better in the world, and overall physical health and robustness of life. And then another group may meditate because they are interested in seeing their true nature as universal consciousness, or let's say, just to put the same thing in other words, connection with the divine or with source. So what would you tell a person who is interested in, has been meditating, but they feel they haven't achieved either of these goals very well? What do you offer for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can both answer to this. The first thing that comes for me is that you can close your eyes and hold still, but it's not necessarily meditation.
Mhm.
Meditation is a state that occurs neurologically. It's not necessarily like just the activity. And I think that people will talk about that as the experience of, I can't get my monkey mind to calm down, which, I mean, hey, any of us can still have that. It doesn't matter how many hours or how advanced we are neurologically, we can still have the monkey mind happen. Um, but that it's not, you're going to get the yield when you amplify basically that process. So if you can help the brain to learn how to do what it is that, I mean, meditation is very effective, and I highly recommend it, and I'm in no way slamming it. And it's a very slow road, right? And in the old ways of thinking about it, it's like, be fine with the slowness. The slowness is your friend. The torture of your mind is your friend. And I'm kind of the mind of like, yeah, or maybe not. Like, what about if we just could figure out how to do it faster? Like, where does innovation factor in? And this is, as you know, both of us being practitioners, and I think this is another amazing thing too, is like we can honor the sacred, the timeless, the things that have been around for eons, like meditation, right? But then at the same time, we have to also be able to honor what's there to help us amplify that. And there's nothing wrong with, and in fact, it's such a benefit to do that, because the real benefit of meditating isn't the hours spent with eyes closed, but who are you when you're awake and moving through your world? What energy field do you emanate, and what change do you make from there?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
getting those results is beneficial for the individual and for greater good. And let's get there.
Right.
It, and on a basic level, what we're doing is creating states of consciousness. And for a person who doesn't get into meditation too quickly or easily, or is frustrated with that, having like neurosociative type of conditioning along with that, meaning like neurofeedback or feedback based on their waves in their brains. And then they start feeling the state. And when they're in that state, they get rewarded for that state. And then they start feeling it internally. It's not a thought process at that point. It's a state that they're in. It's a feeling. And once you can really dial into that feeling, it's easy to meditate. And then you drop right in. And then on that path to meditation, and you get the benefits of non-reactivity and anti-anxiety and better feelings of joy and less depression, right? But out of that comes, along the path, comes these greater insights of being universal, of being one.
Mhm.
And it's all part of the same path. It's not separated. And we want to go, oh, we can only do this or this. No, it's all part of it, just a bigger awareness. As your vision opens up neurologically, you're able to navigate those states of consciousness more easily and deterministically, that you can dial that in or shift into that frequency when you want, like you shift into a gear in a car. right? It's like, oh, okay, I shifted it. Now I feel good. Okay, there we are.
Right.
Now, you both have been in this field for a while, and I've been a little bit aware of it. I'm curious how much better the technology is getting so that you can train people into specific states of consciousness relatively quickly.
Well, I think a lot of the advancements have come with not only software, but some of the hardware that we're able to detect without drilling into the skull, right? So,
Yeah, I don't like the drilling into the
It's
skull
not-
part.
and so these determinations of higher frequencies that were typically in the realm of muscle contraction, right? Or what we call EMG. And gamma is the same frequency. So this higher state of consciousness that we get into, that we see in high level meditators, you see in high level shamans with ayahuasca, you see in people that perform at a level that no one else performs at. And we're able to not only detect it, but train it. And there's different levels of gamma, and we're able to induce those states now, which is rather remarkable that we weren't able to just 10 years ago.
And able to do it. So I think what we should back up and describe is what is neurofeedback, because I think that that's a really important piece. So many people don't know what it is. And then sort of the distinction of the way that we're talking about it here. So neurofeedback therapy has been around since the 1960s, and it's in its essence the brain being fed back information about itself. So it doesn't revolve around the construct of the mind. The mind is not really participating in this learning process that much. So there are electrodes placed on the scalp that are sensing what the brain is doing on an electrical level. Those electrodes go into a computer, and then the computer feeds back information to the brain if the brain is doing what it is supposed to be doing. Now, the brain does a lot of things, and it's supposed to be able to do so many different things and shift gears, like what Dr. Drew was just talking about. Sometimes we want to be able to drive in fifth gear. Sometimes we need to be at an idle. Sometimes we need to turn the car off. If we can't do everything that we're supposed to do, it actually is not a good idea. But let's say that the person is wanting to have less restlessness and overthinking. If they're in a restlessness and overthinking state, we can tell the brain directly, hey, that's not it, by not giving it what we maybe call like a reward or a reward cookie. Like they hear or they see or something that tells the brain that tells the brain directly, are they doing the right thing? So if they're overthinking, then they're not going to hear the sound. And if they are doing something different, which is, utilizing much more of their brain, much more efficiently in that case, then they hear that sound. At some point, the sounds, if they've been going long enough, the person starts to feel emotionally and physiologically very different. So we have people hitting transcendent and altered states of consciousness without delivering any psychedelics. We often have people have a full psychedelic type adventure while they're working with us. During said adventure, they might release emotions or remember traumas that have a sense of anesthetic as they're coming out. So they're not feeling traumatized. They're just able to process and move that stuff through. There's the waves and states kind of training. So the waves like alpha waves, theta waves, gamma waves, but we're also able to help people regulate by doing very, very specific work. So we're able to address the function, let's say directly, of the two amygdala, right? Or of the amygdala and the insula and the cerebellum. So there are structures within the brain that can be told either to calm down or to work more efficiently or whatever they need to be told to be brought into balance. That balance is felt as a balanced state for the person with optimization of whatever it is that they were looking to achieve. So it's actually really remarkable then when we want to help somebody, going back to your question, Brian, like, so how do we do this, or what's the difference? Or we can help somebody, let's say, train inside of alpha, which is a very predominant wave within meditation. But we also can have them calm down a hot cingulate, which is an area of the brain. It can be in different locations, but let's just call it a hub within the brain that might be overacting. An overacting cingulate will have somebody meditate. Well, let me say it this way. We'll have somebody close their eyes and have monkey mind for the first 15 years before it calms down gradually. So to go back to your question, Jonathan, about timing, we can get a hot cingulate to calm down in about 5 days, maybe on average, and it might take a few months for the benefits of that to grow in. But if it calms down that quickly, then what happens is that alpha, the waves of alpha can be so much bigger because there are the 15 amps of power that are inside of the brain are now freed up. They're not being pulled into a power suck of that cingulate that's thinking like a little neurotic hamster on a wheel. And it's then able to go, oh, wow, look at all this resource that I have for all of this beauty, for all of this, deep, true meditation, and also for just the goings on of them as they're moving through their day, right? Because that hot stimulant isn't just there when they're meditating, it's there all the time. And it's impacting their relationships, their fatigue, their health, their function, their ability to perceive what's beyond the veil all the time, if it's there. Yeah.
You described that well. Now, many years ago, I used something, a tool you're probably familiar with called the mind mirror. And that person said that there was a certain brainwave signature that involved gamma and certain things, and it looked a certain way on her machine that she called the awakened brainwave state.
They called it the awakened mind. Anna Weiss was big into this. And it would have 2 electrodes, typically placed at C3 and C4. And we would look at the scope of this and how it splayed out. And certain waves were higher when they got into this state. And it's a rudimentary type of detection model, basically, because we're only looking at 2 sites. We found much more in very different parts of the brain that react in different level of stacks. And it doesn't get into things like slow cortical potential, which is produced by different cells in the brain, like the glia cells, astrocytes, versus the neurons that are producing brain waves. And it's kind of like layers in a cake, right? You have to have all the layers for it to be a cake. You can't just throw on icing and say, there you go. Okay, cake. Right. So within that, and all the brilliance that came out of this, the awakened mind, is giving us further detection into those states of consciousness. How do we train toward that? How do we train toward that symbiotic balance and the synchrony between areas? How do we calm one area down and activate another? For certain states, certain areas of the brain can't be overthinking. Other parts have to come on, or unconscious mind really has to step through and step up to the plate rather than driving in reactivity behind the scenes.
Now, when you use your various devices to help train people in these ways, how does it transfer in their life? Because they're not hooked up anymore. Do they learn it through muscle memory, or do you give them techniques, or how does that transference into normal life take place?
Well, ultimately with neurofeedback, it's learning. So when you're provided a signal coming back to you, you're learning how to produce that frequency, how to produce that state of consciousness. So with enough learning over time, the brain can automatically shift there or stay there if it wants. And then you can shift gears toward different states of consciousness. And ultimately, it's not being hooked up to machines all the time or having a wearable. It's being able to navigate your life in a rich format of self-awareness. And once you learn these states, it's pretty permanent. And there's a way to really enhance that and cultivate it even more. And Dr. Amy can talk to that that's a big portion of what we do, is cultivating that afterwards too.
Yeah. I would say it's a little bit, as far as the neurofeedback therapy, it's a little bit like learning to balance on a bicycle. Once the brain has a new way of being and it determines that that is a superior way of being, it wants to hold that. And it grows in over time. So if we're working with electrical potentials, right? Measuring the electrical function of the brain. And if we can make an immediate change with the electrical function of the brain, while we're doing work on one of our, when people come to visit us for a multi-day, usually it's 5-day long intensive. But what happens over time is that the brain actually grows in more connections and in some cases more cells to be able to keep going with because it loved it so much, but it's not able to grow more than a millimeter a month. So we actually see growth and integration, even if we were to do this strictly in like sort of a scientific vacuum, which is not the way we do it. But it would grow in over time rather than recede, so long as the person is in a decent environment. So then what Dr. Drew's referring to is that the entire whole way through, this is not that's why we have a little bit of an aversion to the word biohacking. It's not a chop you up, dissect you, talk about you only in terms of your waves or your body part, your brain or whatever, but rather just holding that frame of timeless soul on an endless journey. And who is this person that's in front of us at that depth? Who is this being that's in front of us? And how do we help them to optimize their energetics, their cognition, the ways that they're thinking, the strategies that they're employing, and helping them to drop into not just the abstract construct of oneness, but the actual experience of oneness, which is a lot of what we focus on. If we're not practically landing that, then we're basically just creating more bog in the mind about, oh wait, I'm feeling really disconnected. Oh wait, I'm supposed to be in the oneness, and then they're beating themselves up for that they're not in the oneness. That's still duality, right? So because we deliver all of that, what we're delivering inside of a construct of non-dualism and also helping people to clear up their personal baggage, we're really able to uplift people in such a way where the way that this spills out grows over time, not just because of the neurology growing in, but because the learning compounds upon the learning. And they now have access to, when they've worked with us, to a level of learning that wasn't available before that. That then once they've gone through that level up, whoa, there's a whole nother playground of capacities, possibilities, learning, and insights.
What are the nuts and bolts of this? How does someone do this? Do they come to you and there are machines that they can, or could you describe, let's say I wanted to do it. What do I do?
Yeah, for sure. So in our programs, we have a very low number of people that we work with a year, probably about 30. We work with those folks very, very deeply. So it's not that we can just suddenly, with our model and with our approach, apply this to a huge number of people. What I find to be incredible as far as in talking about devices and that is that there is an at-home use neurofeedback therapy headset that Dr. Drew made. I think I would like to say it's in part because I asked him to 13 years ago, because I said, this is such incredible medicine. And right now, even if it's done clinically, that people can also find kind of let's say like a more everyday use case clinician near them that maybe is just helping people with like less ADD or lessening their depression symptoms or things like that. But regardless, it's still really expensive. Like a clinician might charge $800 for that original EEG, the electrical mapping of the brain and analysis, and then a couple $100 a session. And a lot of families can't afford that for their kids or, that kind of a thing. So Dr. Drew created the Sensei, and it's a headset that people can utilize at home with great degrees of specificity, benefit, and also very safely. It also does HRV, so heart rate variability training, so that the heart is also involved in the learning and in the calming. So it's a tremendous device. It also has photobiomodulation, so it can help to stimulate the brain directly with laser, with light. So anyway, that's just a little shout out to what Dr. Drew's created. And like I said, I like to think that I was a part of the inspiration because we really I would say that what Holon is up to is absolutely, it's the most top shelf stuff in the world. And we don't want to scale it to make it really busy and work like a mill. It's very important to us to actually keep it as the sacred work that it is. We work with 3 people at a time. And so we have those other options. But Brian, to come down to the kind of the core of it, wires on the head for sure. As far as what does it look like in our clinic, it's it's wires and or a headset. And we have a lot of other ancillary, I don't know if you want to talk about any of the other stuff that we have, Drew, on site for.
Yeah, it's not just training. We have other devices too that inject like current into the brain that we have facilitated in a way that once we get a good brain map, that we're able to help nudge the brain in certain states of consciousness with that electrical input, whether it's through photobiomodulation, which is kind of like lasers going into the brain, or microcurrents, or even electromagnetic fields. And those three different things can actually induce certain states of consciousness, shift the brain there, and then we can train it at that point. And vice versa. It's a dance between both of those. And we're able to tap into frequencies that we are not able to tap into just with the regular EEG because we can't drill, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Amy said that.
That whole thing. I say no. He's totally kidding. If you don't know our sense of humor. No, and so all of what he just described with a very like a microcurrent of electricity or magnetic fields, or we also have a cyclic variable altitude chamber, which looks like a space pod, and it works about 10 times as effective as a hyperbaric oxygen. We have all kinds of different equipment and devices, and all of it we have deeply used, researched, and understood our own bodies, worked with clients for as many years as we have. I mean, a lot of these technologies have been around for a while. They're just not widely known or utilized because in many cases it takes in the neurofeedback cases and in the transcranial stimulation that he was talking about, where we put a little electrical current through the scalp into the brain, those things take massive amounts of training. And I wouldn't necessarily just go and run off and do that with, just any clinician. But a lot of what we're doing with it here is about wisdom and consciousness and creating really incredible, enlightened leadership in our clients. So it is very different in that regard than what an average clinician would have. Also, the scope and scale and the type of equipment that we have is very different. Most clinics would have just one small tool of these sorts of kind of things and have a very limited scope of what they can work with and be working inside of the scope of pathology instead of optimization and building intuition skills and things like that.
And Dr. Drew, you mentioned at the beginning of your last answer, you get a good brain map. So I'm assuming then that that everyone is different. And that's the reason that you get a map, and probably the reason why you don't work with lots of people at the same time. How do you find that everyone is different, and how do their maps vary?
Well, the map is kind of like your fingerprint of who you are neurologically, right? We're taking a look at connections and amplitudes and how areas speak to each other or don't speak to each other, and how efficiently they operate and how fast they operate. So we're taking all that into consideration, looking at things that are hindrances maybe for the person, whether it's depression or anxiety or overthinking or sleeplessness, all these factors that go in. But we're also looking at how far that potential can go. What are their gifts? Are they really good at doing something artistic, whether it's music, whether it's art? Are they really good at forming a overview of something and really getting directional qualities for, let's say, their business or something like that, and they have incredible insight? So we take all those into consideration and really help them enhance those and take away the hindrances at the same time without suppressing their gifts. And that's such a big thing. And in the different types of brainwaves, we'll see like low EEGs, people that have been affected by COVID, people that have been affected by trauma, or even heavy metals or something like that. And we'll have to work with those things to enhance blood flow, to enhance connectivity. Other people run really hot. So like Dr. Amy was talking about before was this frontal cingulate. The cingulate is just a part of the prefrontal cortex. And when that is on fire and all the alarms are going off, it's screaming for attention. And that's when you can't slow down. That's when you just, it's pervasive thoughts. It's almost an OCD type of consideration in the brain that it takes over the thought process and you can't relax. Or we have areas in the back of the brain where the sense of self is, based in shame or based in self-reflection that's not true because it's not getting the right inputs from other areas of the brain. And then we have a lot of brain injuries. There are so many people that have brain injuries over time and traumas over time that they're subclinical, so that they're okay on the outside. But when you really start drilling down into it, that stuff really unfolds. It's like, oh, okay, that's been holding back, and we see that time and time and time again. And a lot of it becomes unconscious because once we shift from childhood, there's different brainwaves in childhood that we really get into. And then as the brain speeds up, as we mature, we lose that connection with the slower waves. And then a lot of instances are forgotten in that, just buried rather than processed. And what we're able to do is get into those deeper states of consciousness to actually unfold and unpack those traumas and the childhood type of behaviors that were not necessarily integrated into a higher self.
Yeah, they may be suppressed into the subconscious. To just further on that, Brian, I mean, watching a map review with Dr. Drew is like, well, this person, and he doesn't have to have ever met them, this person has unresolved mother wounds. This person has a propensity to overthink specifically about themselves, not about the rest of the world. And this person has overall low mitochondrial function. So I want to investigate how they're doing with sleep. And then I want to have a look and see at how the timing is. Oh, well, it looks like that they, in addition to overthinking about themselves, have a hard time with their salient mode, which is the thing that's going to help them decide if something is important or not. So they're probably feeling like they're lacking in strategy. They're probably feeling like they're struggling, and so he can say all of this with zero context, right? It is like having maybe an astrology reading done. I don't even know how to determine. It's like people have this feeling of, whoa, he knows things that I didn't know about myself, but now that you say it out loud, I know are true, or he knows things that I've not been able to articulate before. So, so sometimes that can lead to a sense of anxiety for folks. They're like, oh, geez, what's he going to see? And is my brain broken? Usually those are the ones that have the overthinking about themselves thing going on that I was just talking about. So people can really get wound up about that. But essentially, if we can see it in the EEG, if he can name it, it can also be trained. So there's not necessarily bad news. It's like undiscovered potential, basically, at that point. So but it is incredible. It's incredible. It's incredible to witness. It's incredible to have it done. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I just had a quantitative EEG done on my brain by a doctor in town, and I had something like that done 10 years ago. I was taken by how much more information this computer program had versus 10 years ago. It was like night and day. She gave me a booklet of my brainwaves, and she said a lot of specific things. One thing she said was that one part of my brain is not working as well as it should, which means that another part is working harder to make up for it. And she said, I'm surprised that you function as well as you can, because normally this would be hard for you to do prolonged focus. Well, it used to be I would write books in like 4 or 5 days, 18 hours for 5 days in a row. And that would just come through me. And I've done a lot of books like that. And the last 8 months, I have not been able to do that. And she said, well, that's probably why, is that this part of your brain isn't working as well. Now, do you get to a point where you are actually able to turn on very precise parts of the brain that aren't working as well as they should be?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we can narrow that down and work that specifically for any modification that it needs, but also look at the whole integration of everything. What's holding it back? What kind of input is that part? So these hubs and networks in the brain really work in a way that you have a lot of compensatory mechanisms, meaning that they're making up for other areas. And then they have compensatory mechanisms on top of that. So it really it's not a one-for-one exchange.
Mhm.
It's like 100 to 1, input. And we have to really be mindful of that. And that's when you get into system theory. And that's where I really get into the cytoarchitecture, the architecture of the mind electrically. And then we look at that, right? And go, okay, these variances we have to vary here, and these we have to really bolster over here to make this happen and train that area so it's working properly. And then we start looking into things like nutrition. Are you getting certain things that you need? We need blood flow in those areas too. What's hindering that? And that's a big piece that's come out recently, especially with COVID impacting the brain blood flow. And we discovered a few areas specifically where that center is, and we can actually turn those back on, which is not only remarkable, I think it's a breakthrough for us, is what we're doing too.
Makes me think that, as a psychotherapist, people come to me and I'm trying to help them in a certain way, but if their brain's not working, what's the chances that they're going to actually be able to make a change or keep it going?
Yeah,
That
exactly.
there's so many levels to work on.
It's kind of like talking about meditation at that point. You might have to repeat the same thing a number of times over a number of months or even years in some cases before somebody can really hear something. And that's not going to make anyone else insufficient or wrong. It's actually the nature of consciousness. If it's outside of the scope of what you can grasp, then it's very difficult to build the bridge there, unless you know how to make the bridge go faster. So in the case of meditation, that we already talked about that bridge, but I'd say this is a really awesome point, Jonathan. Years ago, when Dr. Drew and I first met, we had a clinical practice where we just saw kind of, a little bit of everyday people, but mostly we were working with leaders and executives and things like that. And people would come and see him once a week back in that model in those days. And then they would come and see me as their executive coach and strategic advisor. And so, of course, what does an executive coach do? Some part relationship with the wife or the husband counseling, right? Some part, it's kind of goes everywhere, what we might, as far as topic wise, end up covering. And I would feel the difference in those people who maybe felt a little bit stuck and weren't moving as quickly. I would immediately make a referral and say, please work also with Dr. Drew. And then we would get massive changes, right? Because it's so much easier if you have the electrical hardware in place, right? Otherwise, we have to build it. The body has to build it, which always happens and is always great to do. But it's an amazing thing to be able to amplify that growth with the work that we're doing here. And to go back to something that Dr. Drew said earlier, I think that one of the key parts of nutrition is the spiritual, right? So not just the food nutrition, but people often don't realize that they're operating inside of non-strategic or non-accurate schemas and frameworks about who they are or about the nature of reality. And they also have no idea how to work with their energy anatomy. So to me, that's a very non-strategic thing. Like we have an energetic field. It's not just something sort of to know, or like you do a chakra meditation or something like that, but how do you actually modulate? And so part of the training that they're going through and that we teach in general in our programs is to be able to work with their own energy body and to bring in the nutrition and the interconnection into their field directly, to be able to regulate toward safety and homeostasis by doing modulation to the way that their tailbone is working, the way that their tailbone is being held even. So there's a tremendous amount that just goes into framing that gets people off the hamster wheel that then feeds into the neurofeedback therapy or the other, the more scientific. And this is another one is I like to think of it like energy sciences versus electrical or modern sciences, you know what I mean? Like magnetic science, energy science, like it's all energy. If you think about it, like even the electrical impulses in the brain are energy. So that's an interesting frame as well. But having people really understand so that they can lay down the mind, so that the mind can have something to relax into. It can relax into that it's being held with science, but it can also relax into the truth of knowing that they're a timeless soul on an endless journey and that the interconnectedness isn't just a thought, it's a real thing. And so there's both parts of self, all those aspects of self can kind of settle inside of that space.
Do you ever have to deal with people's beliefs that interfere with their being able to open to more of an energetic reality?
We do, but we do a good amount of screening to make sure that people are mostly aligned with what we're talking about and are actually ready before they get here. That's a part of what's beautiful about working with a low number of people. But then even within that, we will hit and find and absolutely honor the skeptic within, or the part that's like, yeah, I'm not that magical. What are you talking about? I don't have the ability to be intuitive or be a part of the all that is. I don't deserve it, right? So there can be those parts that come up for sure. And we just handle those kind of, it's like peeling things back, like, oh, this was a subconscious thing. This thing was driving the running part of the show, and we didn't know it until here it is suddenly at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon when we're in the middle of this event. And so then we're just there with it and have, a lot of the times that's kind of falls under the domain of what I help to shift. But then what's amazing is that right after maybe they have that one-on-one session with me, then they're going back over into the neuro equipment, which then helps to reinforce the very thing that they're struggling, to help them to be free of what it is that they were struggling with just the moment before. So it's really a divine interplay and a dance between the richness of spirituality and that timeless truth with the modern science the whole way through. I think it's the best medicine, I think, obviously we've dedicated our lives to it, so we're a little biased, but I think it's the best medicine that can come to learn in these sorts of ways.
And part of it too, even getting past the belief or non-belief aspect, is neurofeedback works in a speed and a process that is going past the critical mind. It's actually talking to the neurons directly. And by the time you're conscious of that, that boat has already shifted. So it's not a matter of belief. If you focus on it and are deterministic and positive about it, you're going to learn better. But you're still going to learn whether you believe it or not through the feedback, because it's providing input to those sections and the sections are responding.
Yeah, neurofeedback therapy is effective for people in a coma. So as long as you show up for it, it works. And if you want to be well, of course, that helps.
Yeah.
It's always helping. Yeah.
It's a lot of sense, and it's kind of thrilling in a way to think about the ability it can do. But I do have a question that's kind of philosophical, and I'm not utterly sure how to frame it. But there's a sort of a argument back and forth between idealism and materialism, and the idea that consciousness is not created by the brain. It's not part of the brain. It is the brain is within consciousness. And so I'm curious as to how this, you're talking about connecting with oneness, with all there is, with divine, and that seems to me to be something outside of the brain. So I'm curious as to what you would say to someone who might be skeptical about how they can connect. Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, it does. It's a great question.
Part of this is the non-local aspect of consciousness and how we're able to detect our own consciousness internally. And certain states and certain brainwaves really help with that. And early on, I did pediatrics my first 5 years, just all kids. A lot of kids on the spectrum, right? Autistic spectrum, Asperger's. And we were noticing very early on that as they came into awareness, as they came into consciousness, certain brainwaves would come up, typically gamma. And as those started coming up, all of a sudden they could meet you eye to eye. They could actually interact. And we're going, oh, this is a neat little thing that we're coming upon. And then as I started going more into classifying monks and looking at Zen states and looking at really higher states of consciousness, we were seeing the same patterns. And they were able to carry those patterns around more deterministically in their own patterns, the meditators, the high level meditators were. And their sense of oneness was always with them at that point. So as we're able to develop that consciousness comes in, basically through the field, and we're able to navigate that and be the receiver of that as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And Brian, I think that the idea of idealism versus materialism isn't in itself a dualistic framing. And it's if it's this versus that, right? And inside when one is inside of a depth of understanding of the oneness that doesn't come from the construct of the mind. So the non-philosophical felt experience of oneness, they understand themselves to be one drop inside of the ocean, maybe is the word. With it, if you were to analyze the anatomy, let's say, of a drop, you know exactly what's inside of it and whatever, it's like it's still the same ocean. And so, I think that it can be an interesting exploration to wonder where exactly the seat of consciousness is. Like, how does that really work in the brain, or how does that work inside of the divine, or the all that is? I personally like to think of the image of the flower of life. So I don't know if everybody that's listening knows the flower of life. It's a beautiful image that I would encourage you to look at. But it's a bunch of concentric circles, which are all drawn. If you were to start drawing the flower of life, you start with one circle that has a dot in the middle. And to me, that is the person, the individual. And the dot is the center of the seat of their soul, which I don't believe exists in the brain per se. I think that we can influence it through the brain. But I think of it as a non-local, yet when we're incarnated, it's generally surrounding the physical body and emanating outward from there, right? But this being then overlaps with all of those other beings, let's say all of the other people, just to take it from that lens. And imagine the flower of life, all of those concentric circles extending out into infinity. This is more of the way that it's an image, and it's going to fall short. It's a two-dimensional image trying to describe the vastness of the all that is. But if we were to think of it more that there is a focal point, but it doesn't have to be localized into a physical structure to still be localized to the person. And that through all of us in our center points, that's where we all communicate in through the space of oneness. And that oneness isn't just people, it's actually everything that has ever been identified. Everything that has its own unique identity exists inside of the grid of all of reality. And inside of that space, all of the energy and information is actually pooled and shared. And so when we attune ourselves as a human antenna, as a receiver, as a channel, as a conduit, and also as a place as an entity within the all that is, then we can work with and move that energy around. And so, for instance, when I'm leading in I have a modern mystery school that I teach, where people aren't doing the neurosciences aspect of it directly, or if they are, they're doing home use. And where we study and explore and actually build the capacity to experience this reality. And typically over the course of 3 months, I'll have 70 or 80% of people be able to be in a transcendent state on demand with a shift, not even having to do meditation. They don't have to close their eyes to be able to feel and access and work with this grid of energy. But part of the trick of it is coming out of those invisible dualities, where it must be either in the mind or outside of the mind, right? Outside of the brain, sorry, so it again, none of this works if it's just the thought construct. So much of it is getting out of the construct of the mind. And I think that, like I said, I think it's a brilliant question, because so many people have that same, it's a huge wondering. It's one of the biggest wonderings we could ever wonder.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Both of those answers so satisfying.
Good.
Dr. Amy, in your mystery school, since you're not using the neurofeedback, are you giving people concepts or specific tools that help them, or how's that look?
Yeah, it's concepts, it's tools, it's infusion of energy through the all that is. It's daily practices that they're engaged in. The core of it is going to be inside of the understanding of interconnectedness, or that, let's say, the goal of it is that one of the core practices is I've just named it the Holon breath practice, which I can share with you, all of you, whenever if you're ready, if you'd like to do that. And it's essentially it's not a meditation, although it is an eyes closed sometimes practice. You can also practice it with eyes open, just like any meditation. You can not, well, maybe not any, but with meditation, it's connoted with eyes closed, holding still, but we can actually meditate with our eyes open as we walk and talk and move about the cabin, right? So that's the best, I think, to be able to bring it everywhere. But this is not just a meditation, it's actually learning how to work with the energy body. And when working with the energy body, actually reconnect or it re-enliven the connections to the all that is, because those exist inside of the auric field. And so when you understand energy anatomy, there's a space about 1.5 feet away from the body that when we're inside of the I, me, mine, materialist, reductionist, I have to be the scrappy American capitalist or whatever, I'm on my own and I have to fend for myself, like whatever the thoughts, forms and societal things that are in there, that causes a constriction of this layer of our energetic field and a closing off of what looks like mycelial network or neural network or root system. And if that is pinched off, what happens is then we do not have access to the feeling of being connected to the all that is. Right? It also is what causes that to get pinched off is our belief that we're not connected to the all that is. So this practice, although we don't talk about that layer because it would be too confusing, the way that I describe it is that the person breathes through the skin. And by breathing through the skin, since I'm a clairvoyant and I've been studying how this works for 23 years, right? Watching how people transform and transmute energy as I'm guiding them through with words and watching how similar we all are. So there are predictable patterns that then end up being inside of this energetic science. It's not just energy anatomy. There you go, draw your aura. It's all a moving, working machinery, so to speak, this beautiful, gorgeous energy bodies that we have. So once that becomes restored, that layer of the field becomes restored, the person's sense of self and peace and equanimity and safety to a large extent are restored. And then there's other elements that I bring in as well that help to create a stronger coherence and connection with earth energy. Because again, one of the biggest fallacies that we live inside of accidentally is that we're separate from earth when we're actually mammals. We're mammals. We have tails. We're mammals. We have mammal brains. We have fancy mammal brains that think too many thoughts about themselves, but we're still mammals, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to bring people through that, to answer your question, Jonathan, to bring it back, to get people into the practice of just living that way and putting as many moments together in their waking reality as they can, where they're inside of the physiological, energetic memory and knowing of that. It is a soothe and a balm, and it cures so many maladies that can't even be named by the conscious mind. Right?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm familiar with this practice, which I have done. It's very profound, what you call the Holon breath. And I'm wondering if you could lead our audience in what a taste of that might feel like.
Oh yeah, sure. How long would you like me to go for?
Between 5 and 10 minutes.
Okay, great. So I'll do a very quick taste, and people can find more. We have a longer version of it for download on our website for free. So what I'll say is that if you're driving your car right now, do not close your eyes and be very safe. Just listen cognitively and don't really do the thing because honestly, it's that powerful. So I really want everybody to be safe. But for those that are able to, please do close your eyes and just relax your body. Just notice that you have a body and that it's breathing without modifying your breath, without modifying anything. And maybe just a moment of deep gratitude for taking this moment with your eyes closed for your body and all of its beautiful mechanisms, and also for the splendor of your soul, the timeless soul that you are, that's on this endless journey. And so we bring to that then our awareness of our skin. The skin is enveloping the entire physical form, and it's often where we believe that we begin and end. It's the outline of our physicality, but not our actuality. So I will have you see, feel, or imagine the trillions of pores of skin. And even if this sounds like, silliness, just play along. I'd like you to see, feel, or imagine that all of those pores of skin are inhaling gently. Just pretend, just play. Good. And gentle inhales, really in a non-efforting. And then the exhale does not happen through the skin. So just a sweet, gentle inhalation. See, feel, or imagine that air as though it's moving through all of the pores of your skin simultaneously. Good. And the exhales we're not tracking. The exhales can happen through the nose or through the energy field generally, but they're not happening through the skin. Good. And be sure that those sips of air are gentle and sweet. Here inside of the Holon breath practice, we realize our patterning. We often are over-efforting, trying to prove, trying to please, believing that the world is hard. Here's the place where we receive those inhalations with ease. Good. Good. And just allowing for your breath to move through those pores of the skin. And as you're remembering, as you're breathing, you're remembering that your body actually, because it does emit photons of light, biological beings, whether it's a leaf on a tree or any type of animal, we all have a certain amount of light that we're actually emitting, even if we can't see it with our eyes. And remembering that light, like we know from physics, goes on into infinity everywhere in every direction from its source. And so as you take in these gentle, sweet inhalations through the skin, including the skin of the hands and the face, the backside of your body, you can, if you like, just envision or feel the light coming out from you. Okay. And then I'll have you become aware of your spine. And then at the base of the spine is the sacrum, the triangular shaped flat bone at the bottom of your lower back. And then beneath that is the tailbone. So we made reference earlier to being mammals. It's very true. And we still have a tail, even though it doesn't stick out like a dog or a cat. It's there. And so right now, let's allow for energetic softness or warmth or a feeling of connection with this area of our body. And if it's feeling too far tucked forward or too far stuck back, let's allow for a little micro movement, maybe a shift in the pelvis. It doesn't have to move physically. What we want is for that tailbone to allow the tailbone to open for a connection with Earth's energy. Our tail is actually an antenna, a receiver of Earth's nourishment and her wisdom. And when the tailbone is correctly aligned, we receive that divine wisdom. We remember ourselves to be a part of. And we remember to be inside of the experience of the oneness and also safe. Good. So let's allow for the tailbone to still stay in that beautifully aligned and activated antenna state. And then bring awareness simultaneously then back to the breath through the skin. Just notice what it feels like now, those sweet inhalations. Good. Remember that you have this practice with you at all times and that you can, even with eyes open, begin to glide the breath over the skin on those inhalations, adjust and calibrate the tailbone in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a commute, as long as, again, you're safe and have eyes open. You just, at any time, you have the ability to steer, to guide yourself back into the embodied remembrance of a connection and be able to zoom out in your perspective and remember yourself as that timeless soul on an endless journey that maybe shouldn't worry so much about the things of the moment and the right now. Good. Okay, so then I'll invite us to gently open our eyes whenever we're ready. Sometimes I like to reclose them again, retouch in with the breath, recalibrate the tailbone, and then open again.
Beautiful, simple, and profound at the same time.
Good, I'm
I
glad you
like
love
the,
it.
I like the fact that it can also be done like, with your eyes open as you're walking around or in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
How was that for you, Brian?
I found it surprisingly moving. The idea of the tailbone as an antenna to the earth is new to me, but somehow some inner part of me said, "Oh, this just feels right," and I found myself touched inside by this new. I wouldn't even call it a concept experience.
The touching in of the reality of that, right? The
Yes.
experiencing of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh,
So thank
good.
you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So I know we've just touched upon all the things that you two do. If people want to know more about your work, what's the best way for them to learn about it?
Yeah, it's probably good to visit our website. Again, you can get the a fuller length version teaching of that breath practice that we just did. And just check out what we have there. There's also, other podcasts and things like that if people were to look around and just wanted to learn more information. The Sensei, the headset that we talked about earlier that Dr. Drew invented, we can give the link to that if somebody's interested in that. And we talked about briefly the photobiomodulation of the neurovisor. I think that's a great idea as well. But yeah, our work is found centrally on our website, which is Holon Experience. Now you can understand, Brian, why we like the word experience, right?
Yep.
holonexperience.com. So it's HOLON experience.com. And that's a great segue. It's like the first step down a kind of an open path, hopefully, for people to be able to find what they're looking for and maybe even things they didn't know they were looking for.
Mm-hmm. And you have these 5-day retreats and also the whole mystery school, which is a whole other thing other than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also I do one-on-one work with folks. Sometimes I'll just do a one-time session for people, which is an activation session, which works deeply into the soul space and creates basically a psychedelic experience without any psychedelics. For 8 out of 10 people, it's enough of a state shift, usually about 2 standard deviations of change in their brain in the healing process of an activation. So that's available for many. And then, like I said, ongoing one-on-one work with me. And then the only way really to get access to Dr. Drew is to come through one of our 5-day intensives that's actually a part of a 2-month program. And then once people have gone through that program, they are eligible to be a one-on-one client with him. Otherwise, we don't have any direct to Dr. Drew service offerings. He is way too in high demand.
Too bad.
I know.
Well,
Yeah.
Dr. Drew and Dr. Amy, I'm so grateful that you came on our show and shared this exciting, thrilling, fascinating stuff. And I hope that's helpful to our listeners.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will be.
Thank you for having us. I think the big thing is seeing others' potentials and really manifesting those potentials in others is our big drive.
Mm-hmm.
And
Beautiful.
not many people are doing this work at the higher end. You know, it's a lot of times it's trying to get people to a normal state,
Mhm.
And so it's really great that you're using the latest technologies to explore these higher states of consciousness. And I'm grateful and excited that, that field keeps on expanding and you're finding a little bit of a tribe that started to join you
it's
in this pursuit.
Yeah, thanks for being excited with us. It is exciting. Yeah, as far as what we've been offering, it's head and shoulders above anything else that's offered in the world. And so it's fun to be able then to meet with those researchers that are head and shoulders above, right? Those Harvard folks and whatever, and to be
Yeah.
speaking the same language. It's an exciting moment, not just for us as people, as individuals, but also for what we know that the potential is. Because we can ask them to do some research that we basically piloted in we have real life people who have had real life massive changes and experiences, and we can point them in a direction to do research that then just further validates, really that science and spirituality are all the one and the same. It's they're not separate.
Yeah, nothing is. We want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you want to get extra stuff and support us, go to patreon.com/awareness explorers. And any last words, Brian?
No, really,
I think you're still stoned from that meditation.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. I'm feeling a little wordless.
Dr. Drew and I are both in favor of working with psychedelics. We can't prescribe it. That's not a part of our practice, right? But we also love the feeling of knowing that we have access to all of those neurochemicals and all of those expanded states of awareness and reality through many mechanisms, right? Including just sitting quietly with a gentle breath. So it's very fun. Yeah.
Whatever works.
That's right.
Works.
Whatever gets us all there, right? We have some transformation. Yeah.
Thanks again for showing up, and thank you to our listeners. And as always, everybody keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.